Hey everyone, welcome back to Needed Conversations. This is Ryan and Victoria Cole.
We're so excited that you're joining us. Right now, we are in the heat of election season in the United States of America. It is 40-something days from the election, which is really no time at all. And there's a lot of issues on the table. And what we wanted to talk about were the needed conversations as it pertains to how Christians should vote. We know our worldview is a biblical one, that we look to the Bible as our source of inspiration for how we should vote. Mm-hmm. And when it comes to all of the issues that are on the table for voters right now, most people push off Christians and invalidate their opinion as being, too radical or too religious, or there needs to be a separation of church and state. But we as Christians should refuse to be muzzled. Mm-hmm. If every other group is demanding that their values be brought to the table, so should we.
Right.
And so that's what we've been focusing on the last couple of weeks. We addressed the issue of abortion, which for many Christians is the number one issue, protecting the life of the unborn. But then also addressing the fact that we're not just for, making sure that children are able to be born, but that they also thrive throughout their childhood and adolescence and into adulthood, which really speaks to your quality of life as a whole. Mm-hmm. And we as Christians should be concerned about those things. One of the major issues at hand, and really with every election, is health care. Mm-hmm. And so we wanted to take maybe a few episodes and discuss how should Christians approach health care and really talk about, what each party ticket stands for in terms of how they approach health care and what they believe the solution is. And the truth is that it's a very complicated issue.
It is.
Yeah. And we wanted to start by just sharing our experience with healthcare, what we felt like was the greatest challenges during times when we've been sick, when loved ones of ours have had major illnesses or surgeries, and also having two babies. Mm-hmm. What was that experience like? Because first and foremost, I believe that our healthcare system isn't prioritizing the health of human beings from a holistic perspective, but it's more like sick care. Mm-hmm. That every time you go to the doctor or the hospital, it's because you're wanting this symptom to be cured. Mm-hmm. And that's the wrong way to me to approach healthcare. And what we end up doing is we end up medicating everybody. And then there are no restrictions on the pharmaceutical industry in how they're charging and being able to take medicines that cause other challenges that then have to be medicated.
More medication, yeah.
One medicine gives way to another medicine, and before you know it, you're 60 years old and you have the box of pills, and it's 20 pills a day or whatever the crazy number is. And, we've all had elderly loved ones who have those pill boxes, and we wonder to ourselves, does the end of your life really come to this?
Right.
Medicating every ache and pain. Mm-hmm. So we want to share our experience. First off, Victoria, what are your thoughts about healthcare in general?
It's interesting. I feel like everything does happen for a reason. Like, I actually worked in the medical industry. I wanted to become a nurse. But I actually decided to step away from schooling and get my CNA certification, which is only about 6 months at a community college. And so I stepped into like the hospital setting or the doctor's offices because I wanted to see if it's something that I really wanted to do, which I love. I love serving people. I love helping people. Blood and all that stuff did not scare me. I was willing to learn. But what I have seen is what you were saying is it's a really broken system. And, these nurses are out there and doctors are working and they have to submit themselves to a specific system. And I understand because of, liability issues, there are some things that, come into play. There's paperwork, people suing nurses and doctors. So there's a lot that's on the line. And I think that that's another reason why, I think medical is medicine in general is so expensive. Like I know in my country, you only go to a doctor or a hospital when you're in dire need.
Mm-hmm.
For the majority of the times. And from what I remember in our system, in our hospital system, if you ever came to the hospital, you were put on a specific diet, and it wasn't like, fries or liquids, which is filled with a bunch of like colorants, which doesn't make sense to me. It was like oatmeal. It was very
You're talking
holistic
about the food
approach.
that they even serve you
Yeah,
in
even the
hospitals, yeah.
food, and most people, if that's not in their routine, they, would be kind of grossed out and like, I miss my regular food, but they're really worked hard to try to like bring you to a place of wholeness. And what I've learned with my time at the hospital and in these doctors' offices is that there was no care in regards to a person's, number one, mental health, number two, really going to the root of the problem,
Mm-hmm.
addressing their health issues in regards to the foods that they eat, to what they're exposed to. It's really like, oh, okay, so this is a symptom, let's try this medicine. And what most people will be shocked to know is that most doctors are not even, because there's so many medications coming out all the time, the one that knows more about medication is the pharmacist. So your physician will actually call and ask, hey, can I mix this and this and this together? Because if like a person is taking blood pressure medication and they're putting them on some other medication that can have some adverse side effects. So I've even seen physicians not even being aware of what these medications totally do. They're just been taught, okay, this one right here treats a specific symptom. But
Mm-hmm.
again, I feel like that we don't address the actual root of the problem, and I think that that's a major problem because it creates like this ripple effect, and this person keeps coming back, because they're getting some other side effects, and now we're putting them on more medication, and that's just not a
And
way
sometimes it's
to.
intentional and sometimes it's not. And then it's just the chaos of the machinery, which is like the fact that pharmaceutical companies are courting these doctors, and then they're basically pushing a certain medication because there's certain incentives and kickbacks and all of that kind of thing, all that kind of stuff. And when it comes to healthcare, just to kind of lay out what the positions are, which I think are very far end of the spectrum, and I think that what we really need is somewhere in between.
Mm-hmm.
And then we as Christians should add another layer to that, which we're going to discuss.
Mm-hmm.
But you're basically looking at a two-party ticket. Yes, there are, libertarian parties, other in between, but when it comes to voting, pretty much at this point in time, you have Republican and you have Democrat.
Mm-hmm.
Right now, on the Democratic side, they've moved very progressive, what they would call progressive, but really it's radical in a lot of ways. But on the healthcare front, they're promoting universal healthcare,
Mm-hmm.
or Medicare for all. Now, the vast majority of Americans are going to reject that notion at first glance. So what they're doing is they're wanting to ease you into it, which
Mm-hmm.
to me was what happened with Obamacare.
Mm-hmm.
You had this more universal style healthcare, which gave access to everyone. But they allowed people to keep their private insurance. And so, but the plan was always to slowly wean people off of that private insurance until we got to a full universal healthcare style of insurance and providing of healthcare. And the talking point on the left, or for Democrats, is that healthcare is a right.
Mm-hmm.
And so that's the belief that is driving those certain principles. Now, on the Republican side, Republicans view healthcare as more of a commodity,
Mm-hmm.
and providing healthcare is for the most disenfranchised in our populations is also a priority. And that's why we have things like Medicaid, Medicare, caring
Mm-hmm.
for children and the elderly populations, and then incentivizing healthcare providers and innovations within the healthcare community by creating competition in the marketplace,
Mm-hmm.
which in turn will empower more people to want to be educated, to become doctors, scientists to discover medical breakthroughs, and in the end, be able to provide a higher quality of care. versus on the other end of the spectrum with universal health care, everyone might have access to health care, but the quality is going to significantly diminish. And so then you ask yourself, well, what do you value? And it's a tug of war, because in one sense of the equation, you say to yourself, well, I think it's a good thing that everyone be cared for that are sick and in their time of need. But would that be enough to sacrifice quality of care on the other end? So everybody has health care, but you never know that you're going to, whether or not it's going to work for you, or how long the lines are going to be, or how long it's going to take for you to be cared for, and whether or not you're going to die in the process. You know what I mean?
And that's another thing that, when I was researching this, that other countries that we so highly speak of that have this universal health care, number one, you're getting taxed a ton, and then you're not getting a lot of choice in regards to what physician you go, and then the average wait for these people is 5 months.
Yeah.
And that's for a medical emergency. So you can't even get in to see a physician because, the lines are just so huge. And again, like you said, there's not an incentive for people to go to school, because medical school, let's be real, is expensive.
Yeah.
To spend so much money to know that you're going to have all these loans to pay back, to be put in a place where you're going to be restricted so that you have, a specific way to care for people. And then they're going to put a cap on how much you get paid. And that's not an incentive for a physician to go through school.
Well, when you
doctor.
label something a right, then that means that the government is empowered to force individuals to provide care at a certain cost, right? And so that means that the doctors will be limited on how much they can make, and what kind of service they can provide, and what kind of medicines they can offer. So let's talk about the challenges on both ends, right? If you think that you're going to rid the system of corruption completely, you're just ignorant. There's always going to be evil people who try to capitalize off of whatever system is at play. Now, there's systems that incentivize corruption more than others, and we can address that, but we're not going to rid ourselves of corruption. So that's just first off. Okay, so on the left, on the Democrat side, with universal health care, so you call it a right, you force medical practitioners to provide health care for everyone, you increase the demand and you lessen the supply. That means you spread out very thinly the quality of care among everyone. And then we think in our mind that the government just is able to print money and do whatever they want, but somebody's going to pay for it. Even Joe Biden, along with some of the more radical ends of the Democratic Party, like Bernie Sanders, Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez, they all admit that taxes will be raised for everyone, not just the upper class, in order to take care of this. And this is only one part of the package that needs to be paid for in their plans. Healthcare, they want free education, higher education. They also want the Green New Deal to be funded as well. And those are all issues that we can address. But when it comes to healthcare, what they're saying is it's a right and we're going to pay for it. That's what they're selling you on. But in fact, you're going to pay for it. And I was just looking at some statistics from the Heritage Foundation that says 3 out of 4 Americans would be worse off financially under a Medicare for All scenario. And what that means is right now, our employers are incentivized to add that in as a part of their packages, healthcare. When you eliminate that, that means the full cost of the healthcare would go upon the tax-paying dollar. So that means the taxes would increase for everyone. And according to their research at the Heritage Foundation, that the average income of the middle-class American would shrink by $10,544. and that 87% of people would be financially worse off. And it's even worse for lower income working families, especially when you talk about deductibles, you talk about some of all of these issues. Mm-hmm. So these are the problems with universal health care. This is what I say. Unfortunately, it's a beautiful statement for us to say universal health care is a right, mm-hmm. but it's just not true. Mm-hmm. Health care is a need, but it's not a right. Mm-hmm. When you say something is a right, that means that everyone should have access to it without measure. It's like oxygen. Oxygen is a right. You're born and nobody can take that oxygen from you because it's just here. It's inherent within nature unless we destroy the planet, right? Oxygen is a free commodity or is a free a right for every human being. Like, you don't have to pay for oxygen. You know, you might have better oxygen or better quality of air in certain cities, but just in general, when you're born, you get oxygen for free. Mm-hmm. That means it's a right. But as far as a need, it's like saying food is a need. So food is a right. Food is a need, but right. Food is not a right.
Right.
You know, and look at food as a primary example. So if you declare food a right, then you start pushing policies like welfare programs that, you know, give out food stamps and mm-hmm. government food. Mm-hmm. Look at the food. All of us, well, I know I have, you have experienced that kind of food mm-hmm. that they're giving on welfare, you know. Mm-hmm. It's not quality food. No. Everybody jokes about government cheese. Everybody jokes about all the crappy processed foods, which in turn worsens the health and the livelihood of the people who are eating it. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
And look at socialized economies where people have to stand in line for bread. You know, the fact of the matter, food is not a right. It's a need. We need it for survival. The same thing can be said about electricity. The same thing can even now be said about internet. Mm-hmm. Is that we have a need in our society to access these commodities, but they're not rights. You don't. I mean, you don't have to have. You know what I mean? I don't know if that makes sense.
Well, I mean, something that we've personally, you know, came across is I feel like that we work really hard, you know, and we started off with paying, I think you paid $30 for you. That was like 7 years ago through the employer.
Right.
And then they had an HSA account, which was like money set aside every year from the company, which you could utilize for your medical expenses, uh-huh. which was kind of helpful. And I think it rolled over. And then when we came together, I think it was like
I think the most we were paying per month was $120
yeah, it was like
for the both of us.
But again, you know, we did have to pay small things out of pocket, but we tried to stay healthy and active. And then once the kids coming along.
It wasn't just the kids. It was when the Obamacare became widely distributed or enacted. They created that where you had to pay a penalty if you didn't have health insurance. Right there.
And we actually sat down and we were like, well, we would rather just pay the penalty, because looking at all the insurances and the what they were uh-huh. offering was crazy. For us, it was a house payment, not even including all of our kids. It was not even
so it went from $30 to $120. To then it went to almost $800
and that was
for our family.
That was with a $10,000 deductible, which means that I had, you know, there was some wellness things included, but it was like so minimal. You still had to pay the doctor's visit if you had an emergency. So all of these things, we were sitting there thinking to ourselves, if we set this money aside, we could pay for everything ourselves in cash, you know?
Right. We could put this money every single month in an investment account and make interest and then take care of whatever we needed when we went to the doctor. As healthy young people.
And you know what we found was really unfair. And honestly, I'm not, you know, bashing on anybody that's on Medicaid or Medicare, because I grew up on that. You know, we first came to America, we didn't have anything. So we grew up on these, you know, welfare systems like EBT, you know, Medicaid, Medicare, because, I mean, there was 12 of us, and that was kind of like a given program to us at that time. And we slowly weaned, you know, ourselves out of it once we established and got a job. So, But yeah, I just feel like it's so unfair, even like when now that we are, working class citizens and we're working really hard to, start up our own businesses and then, maintaining our job. And then the issue that we came across, is having these high premiums that we had to pay. And then, we were not qualifying for anything. When we tried to apply
Yeah,
for any of the
none of the
help,
assistance.
because we got,
We
because technically,
applied to the
yeah,
Obamacare.
because
Yeah.
we technically got paid too much in their viewpoint. And so, I'm like, so how are we, as really hardworking citizens, having to, like, this whole term of receiving health care for all, but then we working really, really hard trying to provide for our family health wise, we're not able to do that because the healthcare costs are just ridiculous. So we had to end up paying like the Obamacare penalty, and then we just did everything out of pocket.
And I just want to clarify too, Obamacare isn't completely horrible. I think for some people it works well
If they get approved, yeah.
depending on their circumstances, and but I think that there's a lot of flaws that need to be worked out. A lot of Republicans actually look at Obamacare and say we can revise it, we can make it better. The Republican Party as a whole wants to repeal and replace, which I don't know if that's the solution either. And I just want to bring a little point of clarity when I'm saying that healthcare is a need, it's not a right. Because when you say that something's a right, then you demand that a third party provide it for you, if that makes sense. Mm-hmm. So, and that third party being the government by and of the people who are paying for it. So even when I say that food is not a right, there are free options for food as well. And when I say free, I mean, back in the day, we used to hunters and gatherers, and you'd pull something together in the woods and you'd survive, that kind of thing. But as Christians, we add the additional layer that as a community, we should pool our resources together to be able to provide food for those in need, to be able to support those who are sick and needing health care in some way. And of course, we know the great physician. So that is an incentive to be a part of our community because we believe in the power of prayer, healing that comes through the blood of Jesus Christ, all of those things. So even when it comes to that responsibility as Christians, food banks are amazing, but what about community gardens? That's what I would love to see.
Right, because there's training involved, and
yes,
that teaches you not only life skills, but also health-wise.
Teaching people how to, plant their own food, those kind of things gets everyone involved in educating them about what they're putting in their body, where it's coming from, how it's being sourced, how processed is it, what about the GMOs, and again, that lends to what the hospital system is sick care. It's not health care. If it was health care, we would be focusing more on diet and mental health and all of these other things that end up producing all of these sick people. Mm-hmm. So I wanted to bring that point of clarity. It's a thin line to divide in saying it's a need but not a right. And again, the clarity there is if you declare something a right, you demand that a third party provide it for you, and or it becomes readily accessible, and that's kind of like oxygen. Oxygen is readily available or accessible to anyone. But if we declare like that, healthcare is a right, and I hope that I'm making sense with this, then that would demand that a third party provide it for you because healthcare isn't something that just comes automatically. You know what I mean?
Right.
I
guess
it's a little bit
somebody has to
but
pay for it for sure. I mean, there's supplies, the medicine, but we've actually talked about this as well that hospitals actually came from churches. At the very
Right, for
beginning,
sure.
the churches were the ones who build and establish these hospitals. I mean, you see St. Mary, St. Jude, all these hospitals that were there. But I think what's happening is a lot of these are being bought out by the government or by the pharmaceutical companies. And then they are pushing their own agenda, and they're creating, this machinery that's like, incentivizing, okay, you get the shot or you do these, then the hospital gets this kind of benefit or bonus. And I mean, that really does not talk about, the health and the well-being of a human being. It just puts them on a cycle.
So we talked about the policies of the Democrat Party. So the Republicans, again, we explained it, but what are the challenges? The challenges, I think, with capitalism in general is that if the capitalism that you enact is not value-based, then it's easy for greed and corruption to set in. And I say this with the healthcare industry as well, because we want to incentivize innovation, which even people on the left will admit that, there is innovation that occurs in a capitalistic society. However, that capitalism without the restraint of a values-based society will cause whoever is striving after what they would deem success or financial reward or wealth to step on the heads of everyone else on the way there. But when you add values based to this as a part of a culture, then that brings the restraints in. And then in addition, I think allowing those who make those big risks, who end up in greed and then fall because of it, the government should not bail them out. The government should not. So we then incentivize the corruption, knowing that the government will bail you out. And if you remember Enron, if you remember any of these financial institutions that have been bailed out over the years, there was economic reasons behind it, but it incentivized people for being corrupt at the top, because everybody down the chain were affected except for the people at the top. They got away, and with their millions intact. And then, but when you talk about the healthcare system from a Republican perspective, what you have to be careful of is the pharmaceutical industry, the masking of prices, the monopolization of the industry. So you have one engine in a city dominating the healthcare system. I know when we were in Atlanta, it was Kaiser everywhere. And there were a few others, but the hospitals were owned by the insurance company. The doctors were employed by the insurance company.
And it really felt like a DMV.
It exactly
They
was a
actually
DMV.
put it up as a DMV because you go to the laboratory, because we had our firstborn with Kaiser, and they made it seem like it was holistic. People, like, they called their doctors midwives for the OB, but they were not midwives. It's completely separate, because I had birth with midwife with my second child, completely opposite. But it literally, you go to the laboratory and they like, go take a number. So you take a number, you sit
literally
down, you
pull the
wait,
little
and they'll
paper
call
tab. Yeah.
call you just like they would at the DMV. And I was like, this is so weird.
So that again is a reflection too of what would happen if universal health care became a thing.
Yeah.
But on the other side of it, it speaks to the negative aspect of what the Republicans are proposing, which is the monopolization, the deception of the pharmaceutical industry, the incentivizing of sick people, because the more sick people, the more clients we have, increase the demand. That means that we have more
when
business.
I was, kind of finishing up my, I guess, career in the medical industry, that's what we started calling them. We stopped calling them patients. We're considering them as customers. And I was
Right.
like, I mean, that completely changes the perception even of a healthcare professional to care for a person as a patient, like a sick person to help. No, now it's a customer. So, when a doctor, before they go into the doctor's, to your room, they usually check the insurance that you have, because they'll know what to offer you.
because they know that they offer you different things based on what they know they can get out of it
Yeah.
from a financial perspective.
And part of me doesn't blame them because I know that they have to pay, especially those private doctors' offices, because I have worked in the private offices where they were not affiliated with the hospital at all. They worked with hospitals at some points, but they were not under them. That means that they were not under their protocol. And I totally understand that because let's say like Medicaid, and that's another issue with these government handouts, is that the quality is so horrible that now most physicians don't even take Medicaid.
Right.
So you have Medicaid, but it's like, well, where do I go?
Or it limits the doctors.
It's so
well,
limited.
The problem with it, and you're going back to the universal health care side of it, is that doctors, they don't want to accept it.
Yeah, because it's really hard for them to get their money because
Right.
the paperwork, everything that they have
Who
to go
wants
through.
to go through that hassle and be
Yeah.
forced to say, this is who I'm going to accept as a patient or not?
Yeah.
What if you're a doctor that has a patient who is refusing to abide by your protocols? I mean, you can continue to see them if you want, but then what if they're also not paying? And what if it's just, a big waste of your time if this person's not interested in their own health care as well,
Right.
and their own quality of living? But going back to the Republican side of things, the transparency in pricing is number one. I believe Donald Trump signed into legislation like an act that would make hospitals have to give you a pricing list, which enables you to see a transparent display of products and services. And it's like going to a restaurant and choosing something to eat and them saying, well, we'll tell you how much it is after you've eaten it. Mm-hmm. Which is exactly what happens. I mean, who goes into a shopping scenario like that? We always know what the price is, what we're going to be able to afford. And then we have the luxury of shopping around for the best price.
And that probably incentivizes the hospital to, produce better,
Well, then that incentivizes,
system.
Okay, well, if we're going to charge this much, we have to make it worth it. That
Right.
our x-rays are more accurate, or our x-rays are more clear in how they display. Or
maybe
now
we specialize
or
in specific
now we move
things.
beyond x-rays and we've developed a new type of thing that's very instantaneous, that has less harmful effects of the radiation, etc. And I'm not an expert. Victoria's not an expert on healthcare. I'm just laying it out as practical and common sense as I know it. And if I get any of this wrong, just please give me grace for that. I've done my research, but it's such an exhaustive topic. I'm not in the medical field. I'm just an average American who wants to take care of my family. And I hope that we're coming across as that.
Right, for sure.
So you have that over here, just these corrupt ways of masking prices that hopefully through this new legislation will bring about some change. But I want to know, if I need an x-ray, that I can shop around and find the best price, or if I need blood work, or if I need an MRI, or if I need this kind of surgery, that I'm also able to find the best person, the most qualified, at a price that I can afford, or that my community can help support as well.
Yeah.
So those are kind of the options that we have. Now, we feel like that the solution is somewhere in between, and that we as Christians also have of a greater level of privilege if we in fact abide by biblical principles to take care of one another and give everything that we have as a community to make sure that there's no one person who is left behind. So we wanted to take this first podcast today to just kind of lay out the scenario, let you know a little bit about our experience with medicine, and we're going to go into more detail with that on the next podcast. So you want to make sure to join us. We're going to be talking about our pregnancy experiences. Victoria's father was recently diagnosed with glioblastoma, had brain surgery, dealing with cancer. Cancer is a big deal. We want to share our experience, and then based on our research, we want to lay out what we feel is the best solution and how that may affect your vote on November the 3rd. Anything else you want to add on this episode, honey?
Yes, and before we step into the second episode, if you guys want us to address some things, message us. You can message us on Instagram, or you can message Ryan through his website, ryancoleempowerment.com. We would love to hear from you guys, from your perspective, maybe your personal experience, and maybe something that you feel like would bring about change in regards to helping our community.
If there's something that we're missing,
yeah
we definitely would be open to what your thoughts are. So comment, send us a DM. Hey, and if you're watching on YouTube, don't forget to subscribe and hit that bell notification so you're updated whenever we go live. This is a YouTube channel where we're empowering you to fulfill your purpose, to walk out the call of God on your life, to live the abundant life that Jesus promised by accepting Him in your life. So make sure to comment below, help those algorithms. Facebook, YouTube, we know there's levels of censorship, so we want to make sure that you get the content that you're subscribed to, so make sure you like and comment as well.
Yes, we'll see you guys next time on our next episode.
All right, see you next week.